The Christian in Complete Armor by William Grinnell. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 18. Chapter 16, wherein the Christian watch is set for him about prayer. The third thing is to help the Christian in setting his watch, or to give some directions how he may keep his heart in a watchful frame, for which take in these particulars. Section 1. First, harbor not any known sin in thy bosom. Second, hath two contrary effects on the conscience. Either it fills the conscience with horror, or benumbs and stupefies it. The latter is the more common. Suffer the devil to anoint thy temples with this opium, and thou art in danger to fall into the sleeping disease of a stupid conscience, and thou wilt have little inclination then to pray. Or, if it have the other effect upon thee, thou wilt be as much afraid as now thou hast little desire to pray. Secondly, beware of any excess in thy affection to the creature. A drunken man, of all others, is most unfitting to watch. Such a one will be asleep as soon as he sat in his chair. Now all inordinacy of affection is a spiritual drunkenness. Christ joins both together. Take heed of yourselves, lest at any time your hearts be overcharged with surfeiting and drunkenness and cares of this life, so that day come upon you unawares. Luke 22, verse 34. It is a preservative against drunkenness of spirit, that the day of the Lord might not come upon them unawares. And of the two, the drunkenness of the affection is the worst. He that is bodily drunk overnight is sober by the morning, but he that is overcharged with the cares or love of the world rises as drunk as he lay down, and how can he then watch unto prayer? We have therefore these two joined together. Let us watch and be sober. 1 Thessalonians 5:16. Be therefore sober and watch. 1 Peter 4:7. Whatever the affection is, the temperancy of it lays the soul under a distemper and indispositions it for prayer. Is it sorrow? Our Lord finds his disciples sleeping for sorrow, when they should have watched and prayed. Luke 22:45. Is it love? Thus laid Samson asleep in Delilah's lap. The heart of man hath not room enough for God and the world too. The heart which spends itself in mourning for worldly crosses will find the stream run low when he should weep for his sins. If the cares of this life fill his head and heart, he will have little inclination to wait on God for spiritual purposes. Section 2. Thirdly, resist this spiritual drowsiness when it first creeps upon thee. Sleep is easier kept off when approaching than shaken off when it hath got possession and bound the senses. This sleepy disease of the soul steals insensibly upon us. When, therefore, thou findest it coming, rouse up thyself, as a man who hath business to do would start up from his chair to shake off his drowsiness. Now, thou mayest observe these few symptoms of this distemper. First, an unwillingness to duty. If thou findest this, it appears thou beginnest to be heavy-eyed. When grace is watchful, the Christian needs not many words to persuade him to come into God's presence. Thou sayest, Seek thy face. My heart said, Thy face will I seek. Therefore, conclude thou mayest. He that would run to the door when awake, at the first knock of his dear friend, to let him in, may, when between sleeping and waking, let him stand too long. This was the spouse's case, and she lost the company of her beloved. It showed plainly she was in a sleepy distemper, and that she was so backward in duty, for that was the door Christ would have met her at. Secondly, formality in prayer is a certain symptom that a sleepy distemper hangs about thee. Grace, awake, is full of life and activity. At least it discovers itself by making the soul deeply sensible of its deadness, and it proves the soul awake that can feelingly confess its deadness. Thirdly, prevalency of wandering thoughts. In sleep, fancy and imagination rule without control. If thy thoughts range in time of prayer and meet with no check from thee, it shows thy grace is not awake. Section 3. Fourthly, express a conscientious diligency at thy particular calling in the intervals of prayer. They that sit up to watch had need of some work to keep them awake. Idleness is but one remove from sleep. I cannot believe that he who wastes the day away in idleness should find his heart awake to pray at night, for he hath that day lived in the neglect of a duty as necessary as this, and it is bad going to one duty through the neglect of another. There is a generation of men that under a pretense of watching and praying always betakes themselves in their cloisters and renounce all secular employments, as if it were as easy to put off the world as to change their clothes. But the world hath found those places commonly to have proved, not houses to pray in, but dens to draw their prey into. It is more likely that those who are pampered with sloth and fullness of bread should be eaten up with luxury and sensuality than with zeal and devotion. The air, when still, thickens and corrupts. The spirits in our bodies are choked with rest, and the soul needs motion and exercise as much as either. In spiritual offices it cannot hold without intermission. Therefore God hath provided our particular callings as a relief to our spiritual devotions. Only our care must be not to overdo. The same thing may quicken and weaken, wake us and lay us asleep. There is no greater help in our religious offices than a faithful discharge of our peculiar calling. But when it is inordinately pursued, it makes the spirit of prayer dull and heavy. Fifthly, preserve a sense of thy spiritual wants. As fullness inclines the body to sleep, so does a conceit of spiritual fullness the soul. When the belly is full, then the bones would be at rest. The man hath a greater inclination to sleep than to work, whereas he that is pinched with hunger, his empty stomach keeps him awake. If once thy spiritual hunger be a little stayed from a conceit of thy grace, thou wilt say with the rich man, Take thy ease, O my soul, thou hast goods laid up for many years. The Corinthians are a sad instance of this. 1 Corinthians 4:8. Now ye are full, now ye are rich, now ye have reigned as kings without us. Paul is now nobody with you. The time hath been you could not do without him. The hungry child did no more cry for the breast than you for the word preached, but now your stomach is stayed, you are full, and can live without him, whereas it was a fullness of pride, not of grace. It is the nature of grace to dilute the heart and make room for more, but of pride cloists the soul. God hath long kept open house in England. The wine cellar door of his ordinances hath not been shut upon us. We have had free access to drink, and that abundantly of their sweet wine. But alas, may it not be for a lamentation to see how many are drunk with spiritual pride, rather than filled with grace after so long an employment of God's ordinances? Such yet they are, who decry all ordinances, and who can live without public preaching and private praying also. There are others who are not so mad drunk, but yet are fallen asleep. They have lost their first life in, and love too, ordinances. They sit with sleepy eyes and dead hearts under them. Well, Christian, if thou wouldest keep thy soul awake, take heed thou losest not the sense of thy wants, Begging is the poor man's trade. When thou beginnest to concede thyself rich, then thou wilt be in danger of giving it over. Section 4. Sixthly, retire often to muse on some soul-awakening meditations. We seldom sleep when we are thoughtful, especially if the thoughts are mused on be of weight and importance enough to occupy the mind. Indeed, trivial thoughts, such as have nothing to invite attention, are given as a ready means to lull a man asleep. That Christian who neglects frequently to meditate on spiritual things and lets his thoughts walk all day in company with carnal, worldly occasions, I should wonder if he finds his heart awake at night to pray in a spiritual manner. Give me, therefore, leave to present a few subjects for thy meditation, and they will be as the alarm which men set overnight to call them early in the morning. Meditate on Christ coming to judgment. Surely thou wilt not easily sleep, while this trumpet that shall call all mankind to judgment shall sound in thy ear. The reason why men sleep so soundly is because they either do not believe this, or at least do not think of it seriously. The servant that looks for his master would be loath to find him in bed when put off our clothes. Watch therefore, for ye know not what hour your Lord doth come. Matthew 24, verse 42. There are indeed negative signs concerning his coming to the general judgment of the world, by which we may know he will not yet come, as the fall of Babylon, the calling of the Jews, and other prophecies that must be fulfilled before he comes. But there are none from which we can conclude that his coming to any of us by death and summons us to our judgment before his bar shall not yet be. Thou art young, thou canst not therefore say, Thou shalt not die as yet. Alas, measure the coffins in the church yard, and thou wilt find some of thy length. Young and old are within the reach of death's sickle. Old men indeed go to death. Their age calls for it. But young men cannot hinder death's coming unto them. Thou art rich, will this excuse thee? Rich man indeed can get others to serve for them here, when their prince calls them forth to war. But there is no discharge in this war. Solomon tells us, Thou must personally do this. Thou art strong and lusty. Thou canst not say that death will be longer at work and falling thee down. Some, indeed, he cuts down by chips and consumptive diseases. They die piecemeal. Others he tears up in one night as a tree by a tempest. Think on this, and thy sleep will depart from thee. Secondly, consider, the devil is always awake. It is time for them in the city to sleep when the enemy without watch. Our Savior takes it for granted. If the good man of the house had known in what watch the thief would come, he would have watched and would not have suffered his house to be broken up. Matthew 24, verse 44. Would Saul have slept in his trench if he had thought David had been so near? Or would Sisera have lain down to rest if he had seen the hammer and nail and Jerel's hand to drive through his temples? The devil is at thy door, and is not that enough to keep thee out of thy bed of sloth? What day in all the year is inconvenient to Satan? What place or company art thou in, that he cannot make a snare for thy soul? What member of thy body or faculty of thy soul, which is not in danger to be abused by him? Hast thou an inmate in thy own bosom, that watch to open the gate to him? And is there not a constant correspondency between them? How often doth he beat us with his own staff? And shall we not always watch and pray when he watches to tempt? Shall not we keep our correspondency with God and Christ, our allies in heaven, as he doth with our flesh? shall thy enemy seek to cut thy throat, and will not thou rise to save it? Consider wicked men are awake, and hard at work for Satan and their lust. O may it not put the Christian to shame. Thirdly, consider how watchful the men of the world are to follow their worldly businesses. Do they not rise early and go to bed late, grudging the very time that is spent to refresh nature in the night with sleep? So bent are they upon their carnal projects. The philosopher observed this and felt ashamed at suffering the smith to be at his anvil in the morning sooner than he was at his book. O Christian, should it not make thee blush much more to see the whole town up and as busy as bees in a garden, one flying this way, another that way, and all to bring a little more of this world's perishing pelf into their hive, out of which death ere long will drive them and force them to leave what with so much pains they have gathered for others, while thou sleepest away thy precious time, though thou art sure to carry thy gettings into the other world with thee, and there enjoy the fruit of thy short labor here with everlasting glory. Nay, consider how watchful the wicked are to take all opportunities to pursue their works of darkness, the adulterer for the twilight to meet his minion, and wilt not thou watch unto prayer, that thou mayest fill thy soul with spiritual loves and communion with thy God? The thief is up at midnight to get his prey, and wilt not thou break thy rest a little to obtain a richer treasure than is to be found in the coffers of the richest princes? Shall these be at so much pains to satisfy their lust, and thou take none to honor and enjoy thy God? Oh, what a shame was it to the heavy-eyed disciples that they could not watch to pray with their master, when Judas, that bold traitor, was so wakeful as to be up in the dead of night to betray him into his murderer's hands. Fourthly, consider how short the time is that thou art desired to watch. Could ye not watch with me 1 hour? Matthew 26, verse 40. Ere long, Christian, thou shalt be called off thy guard, and then thou shalt have all rest, though no sleep. It is but for this short life thou art put to stand upon this hard duty, and is that so long? Oh, how soon is a life passed at play or sin! The great complaint such make is, time is short. They wish they could clip its wings. Is time so short and sweet to spend in sin, and can it be tedious to thee to bestow it in devotion? Why should an hour in the closet be found thoughtful by a saint long, when day and night spent in an alehouse is too short for thy sinner? Above all, consider whether it be not better to watch and pray here on earth for a few days than to wake in hell under endless torments. Fifthly, consider seriously how great a loser thou hast been already in thy heavenly trade for want of watching. It is with the Christian as with some negligent merchant who takes notice of some loss as a round sum that befalls him. At this he cries out, he shall be undone, but regards not the pence and shillings that he idly spends, nor considers the loss which follows upon his daily negligence. Whereas, would he count what in this way was lost, he might find that it amounts no more than the other. Thus the Christian sometimes is troubled for one great sin into which he hath fallen, but withdraweth, he observes, not how negligently he performs his duties, but how he sometimes prays coldly for want of due preparation, and what little fruit comes for want of watchfulness after it, whereby in time he falls low. Whereas if he could bring the several items of this particular losses together, he would find them swell into a sad reckoning. Except with these losses, he hath also lost the tenderness of his conscience. And shall a careless Christian add to his stock? Did you ever go by the sluggard's field, and not find it overgrown with thorns? Wouldest thou but make it thy business daily to watch thy heart, how thou prayest, and how thou walkest after prayer, thou shouldest find a blessed change in thy spiritual affairs. This strictness will at first be uneasy, but every day will wear it off, and a sweet facility follows, when thou shalt see thy gains come rolling in by it. He that finds how well he is paid for his diligency by the increase of his estate will not envy the sluggard his ease, when he shall see him walk by his door in rags. It was the saying once of a rich man who by God's blessing on his diligency had raised a vast estate, that at his first setting up in the world he got a little with much trouble, but afterwards he got his great gains with little trouble. And thou, Christian, wilt find the same in thy spiritual trade. Thy trouble will be most at first, but thy gains most at last, because the way of godliness by use and experience will become easy and delightful. Sixthly, consider what others lose by thy not watching. He that lives in a town wrongs his neighbor as well as himself by not looking to his fence. Thus, one Christian may injure many by not keeping his own watch. First, thy very example is a wrong to others, for this sleepy disease is catching. Thy loose conversation may make others do the same. It is no small blessing to live among active Christians whose zeal and forwardness in the ways of God is exemplary. This puts courage in those that follow them. The heavenly, holy conversation of a master is a help to the whole family. Secondly, thou indisposest thyself for doing thy duty to them. We are commanded to watch over one another in love as those that are concerned in our brethren's welfare. Now how unfit is he to watch over others that doth not watch himself, to provoke others to love and to good works, who needs himself the spur. Lastly, consider Christ's watchful care over thee. Look upon him in thy providency, that eye which neither sleeps by night nor slumbers by day, is thy constant keeper. Consider him in his intercession. There he prays for thee, watching thereunto with all perseverancy, for he lives to make intercession for his saints. Consider him in his spirit. What is he but Christ's messenger, sent as our guardian, to take care of the saints in his absence? Consider him in the gospel ministry, which is set up for this very purpose, to watch for our souls. Yea, every private saint hath a charge to be his brother's keeper. Well, this well considered would make thee first watchful to promote his glory, that so carefully provides for thy safety. What put David into such a rage against Nabal, but the disrespect that his servants found at his hands, to whom he had been so serviceable? In vain have I kept all this that this fellow hath. Secondly, it would make thee the more watchful over thy own soul, if thou hadst so much ingenuity as to fear grieving of thy God, who expresses his tender care over thee. What greater grief can the indolent parent have than to see his child not mind his own good after all his care and cost upon him? End of chapter 16.